Now, let's transition from League of Legends to Overwatch League. One of the big stories in the preseason, we do have one roster change to talk about, but most people have been talking about the caster changes, the changes in talent personnel at Overwatch League. Let's catch everybody up before we dive into this. So far, who has left the Overwatch League as a talent? Doa and Monty, both of them casters, gone from Overwatch League, have separated. Puckett, who was a host, Malik Forte, also a host, and Semler, who is a caster. So that's a total of 5 names that we publicly know have left Overwatch League. Who has joined Overwatch League? ZP, grinding it out in Overwatch Contenders, has been a part of this for a very long time, deserves a lot of credit. Yes.
Round of applause.
That is a success story. As someone who follows broadcasting and is a big broadcast nerd, hearing stories like this, you have to take a second and applaud and really give credit to someone like ZP for grinding it out and not losing the passion and finally getting that opportunity. So ZP is going to be a play-by-play caster. I believe he will be partnered with another another new face, Jake. Obviously, many people know, former player, along with Custa joining the broadcast team. I believe Jake and ZP will be a team.
That is what they said.
A casting desk.
Yeah, correct.
Also, a shift. So Bren and Sideshow, who were formerly on the desk as analysts, will now be casters.
Right.
So that is a shift there as well. We still have a lot of question marks. For example, what about Uber? What about Mr. X? What about Hexagrams? What about Zoe? Zoe presumably will return to Overwatch League due to... we don't know necessarily talent-wise.
I would not put anything out of the question, but yes, she certainly made her mark. If you look at everyone who's left, she made her mark specifically in the Overwatch League as a globally recognized talent. So it would make sense for her to stick with that. I think she has a lot of brand identity with Overwatch League. But I'm not putting anything past anyone at this point.
Anyway,
like, anything could happen.
Yes. So a couple questions arise from this. Jacob, let's start with you on this one. One of the prevalent thoughts out there is that, well, all of these giant names on the caster side of things, on the talent side of things, are leaving Overwatch League. That has to bode poorly for Overwatch League. Is that a little bit exaggerated?
Okay, I think the Overwatch League has a number of problems, which I've outlined here on this show and this desk many, many, many times before. I think that talent leaving is bad. Mostly, though, because of the perception of what it looks like, right? It does make the league look like it's a sinking ship and that everybody's jumping boat. I don't think that's necessarily that simple. Here's the thing. When you look at what the league started out as, right? The league started out as having no credibility. Activision Blizzard had never done something to this degree, right? They had done WCS, they had done Heroes Global Championship, they had done stuff with Hearthstone and WoW, but they had never done something to the big effect of what the Overwatch League is now. And you have to remember how crazy it was they were asking people for $20 million each to even participate in this thing, right?
Still sounds crazy.
It does. And it became even more. It was 35 to 60 million by season 2, right, in that variable range. So yes, it's a little nuts. But you had to have credibility from the viewership perspective as well. So it made sense to go pay Monty and Doa to switch over to Overwatch. And granted, they were casting Apex for a while, but I would bet that Blizzard had some say in that decision or influence in the decision for them to do Apex and do Overwatch. You had to go get the Ubers of the world. You had to go get Semler, who probably was like, him and Crumbs were the most surprising of the additions that came into Season 1, right? Because Crumbs is the League of Legends guy who made his mark as a broadcaster for being like the prophet during Worlds for League of Legends. He would not make Worlds as a player and then would show up on the desk and really was a great broadcaster. But Crumbs was not an Overwatch guy. Semler was a Counter-Strike guy. Not just a Counter-Strike guy.
And may soon become a Counter-Strike guy again.
But yeah, he was the Counter-Strike guy, the trio everyone enjoyed. It was him, Anders, and Moses, the On Fire trio that everyone loved, right? And there was a little bit of like separation between him and Anders at one point, so it made sense for him to move on and to go to Overwatch. And he also had a great relationship with Monty and Doa, who were going to the Overwatch League, right? So it made sense, but it was definitely the most surprising.
So those are the decisions then, but now them leaving.
Yeah, I think that when you look at them leaving, right, you have had a significant change in management. Nate Nanzer, who was sort of the brains of this operation, he was the guy that came up with the original idea. He once told me about meeting Jeff Kaplan, the game designer of Overwatch, at Gamescom in Germany, where he like bumped into him at a breakfast cafe or like a breakfast buffet at a hotel where basically he pitched, and Nate at the time was working in global consumer insights at Blizzard, pitched Jeff on what became the Overwatch League. Obviously with some modifications with the money and everything else, but Nate was really good, I think, about defaulting on creative control to his commentators. People like Monty were very involved on the back end of production in terms of suggestions and consultancy about building the league. Now you have Pete Plastelka, who's a very different manager. This is a guy who is a very top-level executive at Fox Sports. He has a very
different... He comes from traditional sports.
Correct, yes. And he also, you know, like... Traditional sports is someone who works at a traditional media company here, in a traditional media sports company. You know, it's very much like traditional sports people like people being in their role. And
yes.
the role of caster, so, you know, not having as much creative control as they did under Nate Nanzer, who came from gaming and global consumer insights, right? So I think that a lot has changed here. Also, I think that because of the situation the Overwatch League was in back then, that they probably had to pay these people a lot of money to make that role switch. And I don't know if the offers were going to be, I would presume they were raises, but I don't know that they were respectable raises, right? Meaning that they were going to pay them a ton more, right? After 2 years of service. And so,
and to be clear, if your contract is up, there's no obligation on the company's front to even offer a raise. It might be well received and assumed on the caster front,
right,
but there's no obligation.
Right.
Once the contract is over, it's over. So even if the company comes back and says, we'll offer you half the money, it is legal for them to do so.
So I am concerned about the Overwatch League, front and center. But the reason I'm concerned about it at this point is because other things like the Intel deal and the HP Omen deal, which at the time when they were signed were like two of the biggest deals ever in esports for sponsorship, as well as that $90 million Twitch deal, and also like the ESPN broadcasting deal, none of those things have been renewed at this point. And so therefore, that's my concern. Those are the dollars that need to come into the league. And also, from my perspective, the things I've been hearing from talking to people around the league, both on the Activision Blizzard side and the team side, is that people are overspending. They overspent like crazy the last 2 seasons. That clearly the task that it would become to do this geolocation is going to be way over the estimates, both on the team and the league side. There are a ton of money concerns. I think the casters are the most visible because these are visible public figures, but that is not what worries me in the long term, because actually the people coming in are endemic to Overwatch. They know the game at a very high level. People like ZP and Jake and Kusta, right? And Sideshow and Bren. I think that all those people know the game really well, and if you are a hardcore Overwatch fan, which is about the only type of people that watch this league right now, because the audience, like the general audience, can't follow it at all, because the game kind of sucks to watch as a viewer. You know, looking at it generally, I think that you're going to get you may even get a better experience if you're a hardcore Overwatch person and you want ZP and Kusta and Jake's hardcore analytics, you know, I am former player or I am talented person that only does Overwatch. You may get a better experience from that perspective, but to end this point here, I have concerns generally about the Overwatch League. The casting is concerning, but it is not the biggest concern as we head into Season 3.
Emily, one of the other prevalent thoughts here as people evaluate the success and failure impending for Overwatch League in Season 3 is that if Overwatch League fails, that's going to make a lot of investors gun-shy about esports in general, not just Overwatch League moving forward. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, of course it will. I mean, most people still see like esports as a monolith and not individual esports. Like when I try to explain Overwatch League versus something like LPL versus something like the Counter-Strike major circuit, like people already think it's like the same thing. So, I mean, of course it will. Like, I think to a lot of Jacob's points, there were a couple of things I wanted to say, but I know he went a little long, so I'll cut down what I wanted to say, but to kind of piggyback on that. I think the big thing is that, like, in a vacuum, if all of this other stuff wasn't happening with, you know, geolocation and that kind of thing, I think the casters leaving would be a natural flow of, okay, we helped set up this game and now we're going to let it be taken over by people who are endemic to the scene, you know, people who have made their name doing Overwatch, people who have been, you know, kind of at the ground floor and not in a way where they were already casting another game, but that Overwatch like actually is, you know, their game. But I think, you know, because of all of the other stuff that's happened, I've spoken a lot about problems with the tier 2 scene and how that's been addressed. That's my main concern, in addition to the game itself, is how like you don't have this same kind of amount of talent coming up to replace the large amount of talent that retired this year, actually. So, I mean, Jake and Custa are two examples. They're going to the desk, and naturally that does happen, especially at the beginning of something being an esport, is that it you have people naturally, you know, playing this isn't for me, I'm gonna go become a part of the broadcast. That's something that happens all the time. But I think because of all the other stuff that's happening, and you know, I just have so many questions going into the geolocation, because I do still think like it's really funny that we're so down on Overwatch now, because if you remember last year, we were super down at this time on LCS. We were like, LCS did nothing in their first year of franchising. They look terrible. Compare that to all the deals that Overwatch League had. This is doom and gloom. So I think a lot of the time we do tend to like hyper focus on whatever is perceived to be struggling at the moment. But the big thing for me is that this is Overwatch League's like most important year, in my opinion. Like if last year was kind of the year where they're coasting a bit, they're shrinking in comparison to the going huge in year one. They made such a huge splash in year one, actually. Like people were crediting them left and right, especially for the sponsorship deals, some of which Jacob mentioned, but even, you know, stuff like the Toyota deal or the Sour Patch Kids deal. Like everyone was just like, wow, you got so many great sponsorships and the LCS has nothing. Like everyone was kind of making that comparison, whether it's specious or not. We can argue that at a different time. But I think going into this year is their most important year. And all people are talking about are massive broadcast departures. Do we even know how broadcasts are going to work at homestands? Because I know like certain countries have it regulated that the live broadcast has to be in, you know, that language. So is the Chinese cast taking point for the Chinese homestands? Is the South Korean cast, which is very well known and very beloved in South Korea, by the way, people love that casting team, are they taking the point at Seoul Dynasty's homestand? Is there like a French cast to do the Paris Eternal? Because if I remember correctly from League of Legends, you know, you have a rule in France that you have to, you know, you absolutely have to have a native broadcast in French, which makes sense. But so like, are these caster departures tying into that because the English broadcast is going to sometimes be out of LA? Like what's going on with that? And then this is the year that you want to make a huge splash, and all anyone's talking about are caster departures, and like who is flying economy versus who is flying business class is like the major shade right now being thrown out around the Overwatch community. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's like certain teams are only flying economy. Like we need to figure out which teams these are. But the fact that that is what people are talking about, instead of, wow, we're so excited to see these homestands in Seoul, in New York, in Dallas, which the Dallas homestand was really well attended last year, you know, like everyone loved that when it happened. Everyone was like, wow, this is amazing. This is great. There are so many people here. This was by far and away a success. You know, what happened to all of that in the span of a few months is that now no one's talking about that and everyone's talking about departures and economy class flights.